If 60 million girls suddenly went missing, we'd be outraged. The struggling truth, according to United Nations Population Fund and reported by Sherry Carabin, is that 60 million Asian girls have gone missing, yet we are not outraged. Okay, so these girls weren't abducted by aliens, but the major causes are degrading. Abortion, infanticide, and neglect, because girls in Asia are not viewed as the precious children they are. The major player in this atrocity is China, because in 1979, they enacted a policy, known as the one-child policy, that, as its name implies, prohibits Chinese couples from being more than a single child. Ms. Hesketh explains that in the face of a rapidly rising population and a dwindling economy, Chinese leaders viewed the policy as the only way to keep the country stable. How that policy is connected to those millions of missing girls will be discussed in a moment, for based on my research of the one-child policy, I will present information to you about the negative, though apparently unintended, effects the policy is having on China besides the control of population. These unintended consequences are severe and have the potential to harm not only China but other countries as well. So during the following minutes, I will present information to you about these unintended consequences, which include an unbalanced sex ratio, a deficit in the financial provision of the elderly, and the development of an egocentric generation unfit for becoming China's next leaders. The first unintended consequence of China's one-child policy is an unbalanced sex ratio. Now, the purpose of the policy was to control population growth, which it has. But what Chinese leaders mistakenly overlooked is that the ratio of males to females would become unequal. This is because, according to Hesketh, Liu, and Jing, in Chinese society, they generally prefer boys over girls. Now, this is based on tradition, but it has practical ramifications because boys are able to better provide for elderly parents who become unfit for work. So having a boy is really a measure of security for a family. Remember those 60 million missing girls, though. In order for for a couple's one child to be that boy, they have abortions and infanticides have become more common, so that 25% of all Chinese women have actually had an abortion, and that statistic is provided by Hesketh, Liu, and Jing. So, according to Carabin, because of this, the birth ratio is now 1 female for every 18 males. As of 2005, there was 1 female born for every 18 males born, which means that there are currently 30 million males in China who are destined to be bachelors unless they move to another country. And by 2020, less than a decade from now, that figure is going to be about 40 million, according to Fitzpatrick, Greenhall, and Winkler. As can be imagined, this is more than just statistics. Real people are going to suffer for it. The Chinese tradition is such that those who do not marry are viewed as inferior and are looked down on if they do not marry someone. So some men are stooping low to get a bride, which is giving rise to pervasive abduction and trafficking of women, according to Greenhall and Winkler. The second unintended consequence of China's one-child policy is economic and has to do with the financial provision of the elderly. Now here in the U.S., we are concerned about providing Social Security for the baby boomers, right, as they increasingly retire and fewer young people replace them in the workforce. China faced the same problem, just on a larger scale, since the one-child policy has led to a greater disparity between young workers and the retired. According to Fitzpatrick, by 2040, that ratio will be 2 workers for every 1 retiree. Very small, you'll notice. And this is going to place a harder burden on the child, who must now not only provide for their own families, but for their parents as well, since the government will no longer be able to provide pensions, Social Security, etc. It is quite possible, according to Fitzpatrick, that, and here I quote, China's elderly people will suffer neglect, end quote, in the coming years. The final unintended consequence of the one-child policy is that the country's development of today's girls and boys into tomorrow's strong, capable leaders will be hindered. Now this negative effect is ironic, really, if you think about it, because the one goal of the one-child policy was to raise privileged, academically astute individuals who, lavish with attention and privileges at home, were supposed to grow up into smart, capable leaders. According to Ms. Greenhall, professor of anthropology, and Mr. Winkler, author, the plan backfired, and due to this, and I quote, focus of intense societal and familial attention, today's single children have become little emperors and little empresses, talented and savvy, but spoiled and self-centered, end quote. Analysts are worried, the article goes on to say, that these morally corrupt, self-indulged emperors of the country will become morally corrupt, selfishly indulged emperors of the home, unable to participate in the wise, sacrificial decision-making needed in this era of global politics. All in all, as you can see, China's one-child policy has done more to control a rapidly rising population. The unintended consequences of the policy are far-reaching and are harming or will harm China's people and their interactions with us and the rest of the world. Remember that some of these unintended consequences include an unbalanced sex ratio, the lack of financial security for retirees, and a new generation of corrupt, spoiled young people who, even so, are next in line for China's leadership positions. Though originally intended for good, this is one cause and effect relationship that, like a boomerang, will spiral back to the Chinese and harm them if they aren't careful. Thank you.
Very good.